Hey everyone, take a closer look at this Washington quarter. It may look completely ordinary, but the smallest details can reveal why collectors pay such close attention. Let's examine what makes certain examples truly stand out. First coin. The 1967 Washington quarter looks almost ordinary at first glance, and that is precisely what makes it such an interesting coin to investigate. More than half a century after it left the United States Mint, this copper-nickel quarter can still be found in collections, old accumulations, and occasionally in circulation, yet a truly exceptional example can occupy an entirely different level of the market. The story becomes especially fascinating when you realize that 1967 was not a normal year for American coinage. The United States was struggling with a serious nationwide coin shortage. Silver was disappearing from circulating denominations, and the mint was producing coins on a scale designed to keep commerce moving. The quarter dated 1967, therefore, represents a major transition in American monetary history, but its collector importance depends on something much more selective than the date alone. Throughout this examination, we will look at how the coin was produced, why it carries no mint mark, how its composition differs from earlier Washington quarters, how regular circulation strikes can be separated from special mint set pieces, what condition actually means for value, and why a tiny fraction of surviving examples can bring dramatically more than ordinary pieces. Most importantly, we will eventually examine documented auction results for authenticated coins and see exactly which characteristics can turn an otherwise common 1967 quarter into a serious numismatic acquisition. To understand why the 1967 quarter exists in such enormous numbers, you have to step into the economic atmosphere of the mid-1960s. The United States was experiencing an intense shortage of circulating coins as the public increasingly held onto silver coins, while rising metal prices and economic uncertainty changed the relationship between face value and intrinsic value. Congress responded with the Coinage Act of 1965, which authorized the replacement of traditional 90% silver dimes and quarters with copper-nickel-clad compositions. The Washington quarter did not disappear. Instead, its physical identity changed. By 1967, the familiar portrait of George Washington remained on the obverse, but the coin was being struck in a copper-nickel-clad structure rather than the traditional silver alloy. Production was enormous because the mint needed to refill a monetary system starved for small denomination coins. The combined 1967 Washington quarter output reached 1,524,031,848 pieces, with Philadelphia accounting for 873,524,000, Denver associated production totaling 632,767,848. And San Francisco producing 17,740,000 pieces for the year's special mint program. Those figures explain an important point about rarity. The 1967 date itself is not rare. In fact, the huge production makes an ordinary circulated example one of the least likely coins in the series to command a premium simply because of its date. The real collecting challenge lies in locating exceptional preservation, unusual varieties, significant errors, or extraordinary certified grades. One of the most frequently misunderstood features of the 1967 Washington quarter is the complete absence of a mint mark. A collector accustomed to seeing a D for Denver or an S for San Francisco might immediately suspect that a missing letter indicates an error, but on a normal 1967 circulating quarter, no mint mark is exactly what should be there. During the 1965 through 1967 period, the mint deliberately removed mint marks from circulating coins as part of an effort to discourage the public from identifying and hoarding coins from particular facilities while the nation dealt with the shortage. That means a 1967 quarter without a mint mark is not automatically rare, unusual, or defective. It can represent production connected with the Philadelphia facility, or more broadly, the unusual multi-mint production system of that era. while the San Francisco output associated with 1967 was directed towards special mint sets rather than ordinary circulating coins. The distinction becomes important when a collector encounters a supposedly 1967 quarter or a seller claims that a missing mint mark is a major error. Authentication begins with understanding what the coin is supposed to look like before deciding that something is wrong with it. In this case, the blank area beneath Washington's portrait is part of the normal design for the 1967 circulating issue. The absence of a letter is therefore historical evidence of mint policy, not a rarity by itself. Physically, the 1967 quarter follows the basic Washington quarter specifications that collectors know so well. It measures approximately 24.3 millimeters across, weighs 5.67 grams, and has a reeded edge. Its metal is a copper-nickel outer layer surrounding a pure copper center, creating the familiar clad appearance that became standard for circulating U.S. quarters after the silver transition. The outer layers contain 75% copper and 25% nickel, while the center is copper, giving the finished coin its characteristic combination of pale metallic surfaces and a warmer copper-colored line visible along the edge. That edge can be useful when examining an allegedly unusual specimen, although color alone cannot establish authenticity or an error. The obverse retains John Flanagan's portrait of George Washington, with Liberty above, In God We Trust on either side of the portrait, and the date below. The reverse presents the national eagle beneath United States of America and above $quarter, surrounded by stars and accompanied by the traditional EPLURIBUS UNUM inscription. The design itself was already well established by 1967, but the metal beneath it tells a much newer story. The mint had to adapt its presses, planchets, and production procedures to a new clad composition while simultaneously manufacturing billions of pieces. That combination of technological transition and unprecedented production volume helps explain why quality varies so widely among surviving coins. A quarter could be struck correctly and still emerge with marks, weakness, or surface disturbances that later become important to collectors evaluating high-grade examples. The production environment of 1967 also created one of the most important distinctions in this entire date: the difference between an ordinary business strike and a special mint set quarter. Because the mint was not issuing conventional annual uncirculated coin sets in the same manner as earlier years, it produced special mint sets during 1965, 1966, and 1967. Approximately 1,863,344 special mint sets were produced in 1967, and their quarters were specially prepared for collectors rather than struck simply to satisfy day-to-day commerce. To an inexperienced eye, an SMS quarter can look like an unusually nice uncirculated circulation strike, but specialists examine surface texture, reflectivity, strike characteristics, and overall appearance to determine which category the coin belongs in. SMS pieces often have a more distinctive, almost glassy or specially finished appearance, whereas a true business strike can display the normal luster and surface character associated with mass production. This distinction can dramatically affect how a coin is catalogued and valued. A certified 1967 SMS quarter is not automatically worth hundreds or thousands of dollars, either. For perspective, documented PCGS auction records include an SB67 SMS example selling for only $20 in 2019, while another SB67 SMS example recorded a $759 result in 2009. Those differences illustrate why certification, appearance, population, and market context matter far more than simply seeing the letters SMS attached to a 1967 quarter. The safest approach is to have the coin correctly attributed before making any assumptions about rarity. Once ordinary circulated examples are separated from coins with genuine collector appeal, grading becomes the central issue. A worn 1967 quarter generally has little or no premium beyond its face value, and even an attractive circulated piece is not transformed into a rare coin simply because it has survived for nearly 60 years. The situation changes when the coin remains in mint state. In the Sheldon-based grading system used by major certification services, mint state grades generally run from MS60 through MS70, with higher numbers representing progressively stronger preservation and fewer significant imperfections. On a 1967 quarter, the difference between MS64, MS65, MS66, and MS67 can be surprisingly important because the market becomes much more selective at the upper end. A coin can technically be uncirculated, yet still carry numerous contact marks from being transporting and handled in bags. Another may have excellent luster but a weak strike. A third may be sharply struck but possess unattractive tunning or distracting marks in prominent fields. Collectors seeking premium 1967 quarters therefore examine Washington's cheek and hair, the open fields around the portrait, the eagle and surrounding lettering on the reverse, and the overall balance of marks and luster. PCGS research identifies the current top certified regular strike grade as MS68, and its population data shows how dramatically the surviving population narrows at the highest grades. That is where rarity begins to matter, not because the date is scarce, but because extraordinarily clean examples are scarce relative to the enormous number originally produced. This is also where realistic value begins to separate into very different categories. An ordinary circulated 1967 quarter should not be presented as a four-figure treasure, and even many attractive uncirculated examples remain modestly priced. But the uppermost certified grades tell a different story. A documented PCGS MS67 example sold for $200 in a 2014 auction, while other MS67 and MS67 Plus results have varied substantially depending on the specific coin and marketplace. One particularly important MS67 Plus example recorded a $5,170 result in 2016, illustrating how a single exceptional coin can outperform ordinary examples by a wide margin. At the MS68 level, the difference becomes even more dramatic. PCGS records a $4,465 sale for an MS68 example in 2017, while another MS68 specimen reached $8,812.50 at Heritage Auctions in January 2017. A later appearance of the same notable coin brought $5,040 in 2019, followed by another result of $4,800 in 2020, demonstrating that auction prices can move considerably even when the underlying coin has not changed. These figures should never be interpreted as a standard price for every 1967 quarter. They represent exceptional certified coins at the extreme upper end of preservation, and market conditions, eye appeal, certification population, pedigree, and competition among bidders can all influence the final result. The most extraordinary part of the 1967 quarter story is that the documented auction record can climb far beyond the normal collector range, but only when the coin reaches an exceptional level of certification and quality. PCGS lists an auction record of $8,812.50 for a regular strike 1967 quarter graded MS68, while CoinWeek reports that an NGC-certified MS69 example sold for $8,156.25 in August 2024. Those results are precisely why responsible collectors must distinguish an exceptional coin from an ordinary Dayton-type example. The difference between a quarter worth its face value and one worth several $1,000s may be almost invisible to someone without grading experience. At the top end, tiny contact marks, subtle hairlines, weak luster, or minute imperfections can separate one numerical grade from another, and population reports become increasingly important because the number of surviving coins at the highest grades is extremely small compared with the original production. Even tunning can influence desirability when it is natural, attractive, and consistent with the coin's history, while artificial coloring, harsh cleaning, polishing, or chemical alteration can destroy collector confidence. Color classifications are therefore best understood as part of eye appeal rather than as a magical value formula. A beautifully toned MS68 may attract intense bidding, but color cannot compensate for a poor grade or establish rarity on its own. What matters is the complete package: authenticity, correct attribution, preservation, strike, surfaces, eye appeal, certification, and the willingness of collectors to compete for that particular coin at that particular moment. Errors and varieties add another layer, but this is an area where caution is essential because damaged coins are routinely mistaken for mint errors. A genuine double die, off-center strike, broad strike, clipped planchet, wrong planchet error, or other major production mistake can have substantial collector interest, but the abnormality must originate during the minting process. A quarter with a scraped date, flattened lettering, machine damage, discoloration, or damage caused after leaving the mint is not automatically a valuable error. The same principle applies to supposed varieties that are merely lighting effects, die deterioration, or ordinary wear. On a 1967 quarter, the collector should first photograph both sides under good neutral lighting, weigh the coin with a precise scale, measure it when necessary, inspect the edge, and compare the design carefully with verified examples. A professional grading service can then determine whether suspected error or variety is genuine. Counterfeit awareness is equally important at the high end because once a coin becomes valuable, the incentive to alter or counterfeit it increases. Never rely solely on a slab label purchased from an unknown source, and never assume that an internet listing price represents market value. Certification numbers should be independently checked through the grading company's records, and the physical coin should correspond to the certified description. A genuine 1967 quarter with an unusual feature can be fascinating, but the burden of proof belongs with the claim. Serious numismatics rewards evidence, not excitement. Preservation is the final piece of the value equation because the condition of a 1967 quarter can determine whether it remains ordinary or becomes genuinely collectible. If you discover a sharp example, resist the temptation to polish it, rub it with a cloth, dip it in household chemicals, or attempt to make the surfaces look brighter. Cleaning can leave hairlines and unnatural surfaces that experienced graders immediately recognize, and a damaged coin can lose much of the premium it might otherwise have earned. Handle an important coin by its edges and avoid touching the fields with bare fingers. For long-term storage, an inert archival quality holder, capsule, or professionally graded holder is preferable to loose contact with paper, PVC-containing plastics, or unstable materials. Keep coins away from excessive humidity, heat, and rapid environmental changes. For serious specimens, documentation matters as well. Record where the coin came from, its certification number if applicable, photographs, and any previous auction or ownership information. Such records can become especially useful if the coin is later submitted for grading or offered through a major auction. Remember that a 1967 quarter does not become valuable simply because it is old. Its age is only part of the story. The market rewards preservation because high-grade examples represent a tiny fraction of what was originally produced, and it rewards rarity because collectors cannot simply manufacture another genuine example when the best pieces have already been absorbed into collections. That is why two coins carrying exactly the same date can have radically different financial outcomes. The 1967 Washington quarter ultimately tells a story far more interesting than the face value stamped into its design. It captures a moment when the United States was fighting a coin shortage, moving away from silver, expanding production to extraordinary levels, eliminating mint marks from circulating issues, and experimenting with special mint sets for collectors. More than 1.5 billion regular strike quarters were produced, so the date itself is common. What is uncommon is finding one that combines exceptional preservation, outstanding strike quality, attractive surfaces, and a grade at the very top of the certified population. That distinction is supported by the auction record. While an ordinary circulated 1967 quarter may remain a 25-cent coin, elite certified pieces have reached approximately $3,960, $4,465, and even $8,812.50 in documented sales, with the most exceptional certified examples commanding results that have little connection to the value of an everyday specimen. The lesson is not that every 1967 quarter is secretly worth thousands. It is almost the opposite. The vast majority are common, and that makes the rare survivors more meaningful. If a 1967 quarter catches your attention, look beyond the date. Examine the surfaces, the strike, the edge, the tunning, the absence of a mint mark, the possibility of an authentic mint error, and especially the distinction between a business strike and an SMS piece. Then, if the coin genuinely appears exceptional, let professional authentication and grading establish what the eye alone cannot. In the world of numismatics, rarity is not created by a dramatic claim on a label. It is earned through evidence, condition, scarcity, and a documented market willing to recognize the difference. Next coin. There is something unusual about the 1776-1976D Washington quarter that becomes more apparent the longer you study it. This is a coin that was produced in enormous numbers, yet the finest survivors can become surprisingly difficult to locate. The familiar D beneath Washington's portrait identifies Denver, while the unusual dual date, 1776-1976, immediately places the coin in a very different chapter of American numismatic history. Unlike an ordinary Washington quarter, this piece was created specifically to commemorate 2 centuries of American independence, and its reverse temporarily replaced the familiar eagle with a colonial drummer surrounded by 13 stars. Millions of Americans pulled these quarters from circulation simply because they looked different, which means the coins that survived in pristine condition did not necessarily follow the normal path of an ordinary pocket quarter. That distinction is at the heart of this coin's collector appeal. Later, we will examine the production numbers, the physical characteristics that identify a genuine Denver issue, the grades that separate ordinary examples from scarce survivors, the recognized double-die varieties that can change the entire equation, and documented auction results showing how dramatically collectors can compete for exceptional examples. Most importantly, the value of this coin is not determined by the patriotic date alone. It depends on a combination of authenticity, originality, condition, rarity, attribution, eye appeal, and the strength of demand when the right coin reaches the market. The story begins before the quarter ever reached a Denver press. As the United States approached its 200th anniversary, the government wanted the nation's circulating money to participate in the celebration, and Congress authorized special designs for the quarter, half-dollar, and dollar. The bicentennial program created something Americans had not seen in generations: circulating coins carrying a dual date rather than a single year. The inscription 1776-1976 deliberately connected the founding era with the nation's bicentennial celebration, while the new reverses transformed ordinary denominations into miniature historical monuments. An important production decision followed. Although the coins were dated 1776-1976, the mint began striking them in 1975 as well as 1976. No separate 1975 dated Washington bicentennial quarter was made. This explains why collectors sometimes encounter a bicentennial quarter in a 1975 mint set even though its date appears to say 1976. The Denver Mint was responsible for a massive portion of the circulating copper-nickel quarter production, striking 860,118,839 examples. That enormous figure immediately establishes a crucial fact. The 1976 D quarter is not rare simply because it carries the bicentennial date. In fact, its abundance is part of what makes the high-grade population so interesting. When hundreds of millions of identical coins are released into commerce, the overwhelming majority experience contact marks, friction, scratches, bag marks, environmental exposure, or circulation. The collector's challenge, therefore, becomes finding the extraordinary survivor rather than merely finding the date. PCGS identifies the 1976 D-clad issue as a one-year type featuring the special bicentennial reverse, and its records confirm the Denver mintage of 860,118,839 pieces. The Denver D is especially important because it tells us exactly where this particular circulating issue was produced, but it does not indicate that the coin is made of silver. The standard 1976 D quarter is a copper-nickel clad coin consisting of a 75% copper and 25% nickel outer layer bonded to a pure copper center. Its diameter is 24.3 millimeters, its weight is 5.67 grams, and its edge is reeded, giving it the familiar series of grooves used on US quarters. That composition is completely different from the 40% silver bicentennial quarters made at San Francisco for collectors, and this distinction can prevent one of the most common mistakes in the marketplace. A 1976 D quarter should not be described as a 40% silver issue simply because it is a bicentennial coin. The silver versions carry the S mint mark and belong to a separate collector issue. The copper-nickel Denver piece was intended primarily for circulation, which helps explain why so many examples were produced. There is also an easy physical clue along the edge. Because the clad construction contains a copper core, the edge can reveal a warmer copper-colored center between the outer nickel-bearing layers. That appearance, however, should never be used by itself as an authentication test. Weight, diameter, design details, metal composition, and professional examination all matter when a valuable example is involved. At the mint, planchets were fed through high-speed striking equipment, where enormous pressure forced the metal into the recessed designs of the dies. A coin could leave the press perfectly legitimate, but still acquire marks almost immediately as freshly struck pieces were collected, transporting, counted, and packaged. Those early contacts would later become one of the major reasons why truly pristine examples are so much scarcer than the headline mintage suggests. The artwork itself is where the bicentennial quarter becomes unmistakable. The obverse retained John Flanagan's long-running portrait of George Washington, but instead of the normal single date beneath the bust, the denomination carries the historic 1776-1976 dual date. Liberty remains above Washington, while In God We Trust appears on either side of the portrait. The reverse, however, underwent a complete transformation. Jack L.R.'s design shows a colonial drummer facing left, with a torch of victory or liberty rising behind him and 13 stars surrounding the composition. United States of America arches across the upper portion, quarter dollar appears below, and EPLUBUSUNUM accompanies the patriotic arrangement. The drummer was not chosen randomly. Drummer boys were associated with military life during America's early conflicts, helping transmit commands across battlefields at a time when voice communication was limited by distance and noise. The image, therefore, evokes the young Americans who lived through the country's formative military struggles, turning the quarter into a compact reminder of the human side of the Revolutionary era. The 13 stars reinforce the original colonies, while the torch suggests liberty and national continuity. PCGS describes the bicentennial quarter as a one-year type, with the colonial drummer reverse designed by Jack L.R., and its Washington Quarter Guide confirms that the dual-dated bicentennial coins were issued in 1975 and 1976 with this special reverse. The result is a coin that is historically unusual even before rarity enters the discussion. Millions were struck, but the design itself existed only for the bicentennial issue before the regular Washington Quarter reverse returned. By the time these coins entered American commerce, the nation was living through a period that gave the bicentennial celebration unusual emotional weight. The mid-1970s were marked by economic pressures, inflation, energy concerns, and a public consciousness shaped by the aftermath of the Vietnam era and the political crisis of Watergate. Against that backdrop, the 1976 celebration offered Americans a powerful national milestone. Parades, historical exhibits, fireworks, commemorative programs, and patriotic events were taking place across the country, and the quarter in a person's change became part of that national spectacle. The coin was not simply another denomination produced to keep cash registers operating, it was a piece of circulating history. That emotional connection had an unexpected effect on survival. Many people saved bicentennial quarters in jars, albums, drawers, and family collections because the reverse was visibly different from anything they had handled before. Others spent them normally, exposing the coins to decades of friction and contact. This split created an unusual collecting environment. The overall population is enormous, yet coins preserved from the moment of issue can be dramatically better than typical examples found after years in circulation. The distinction between common and rare therefore becomes a matter of condition. A worn 1976 D quarter is common. A pleasing uncirculated piece is readily obtainable. But once collectors begin pursuing the highest mint state levels, the available population narrows rapidly. PCGS specifically notes that MS66 examples become scarce, MS67 pieces are scarcer still, and MS68 examples are truly difficult, with only a small number known in the highest certified grades. This is why a coin with the same date and mint mark can occupy completely different levels of the collecting market depending on preservation. That brings us to grading, where the real dividing line between an ordinary bicentennial quarter and a potentially important one becomes visible. Professional graders evaluate the coin's surfaces, luster, strike, marks, wear, overall eye appeal, and other characteristics before assigning a numerical grade. A circulated coin falls below the mint state range because evidence of handling and wear is present, while an MS60 or higher example must retain its original mint state characteristics even if it has distracting contact marks. As the grade rises through MS63, MS64, MS65, MS66, and MS67, the market becomes increasingly unforgiving. On the 1976 D quarter, Washington's cheek and hair, the open fields surrounding the portrait, the drummer's body and drum, the lettering, and the broad reverse fields all deserve close examination. Luster is another major factor. Original, vibrant mint luster can make a coin appear dramatically more attractive than a technically similar specimen with dull or disturbed surfaces. Strike quality matters as well because a coin can have excellent preservation but lack complete definition in certain design areas. Tunning should be judged separately from the numerical grade. Unlike copper Lincoln cents, modern-clad Washington quarters are not normally assigned the familiar red, red-brown, or brown color designations. Natural tunning can nevertheless influence eye appeal, particularly when it is attractive and original, while artificial coloring, chemical alteration, polishing, or cleaning can hurt desirability. At the extreme top of the scale, the difference between one grade and the next may seem microscopic to a casual observer, but it can represent a substantial difference in market demand. PCGS records MS68 as the highest regular strike grade listed for this issue and indicates that only a very limited number of coins have achieved that level. That scarcity at the summit is the reason serious registry set collectors can become intensely competitive over coins that, in every basic physical respect, are identical to millions of other quarters. The market evidence makes that grading story much easier to understand. A normal circulated 1976 D quarter is not transformed into a valuable rarity simply because it is nearly 50 years old, and many uncirculated examples remain affordable. But authenticated coins at the highest grades have demonstrated a very different level of collector interest. Heritage recorded an NGC MS68 1976D clad quarter selling for $6,462.50 on January 5, 2017, when the coin was described as the single finest example seen by NGC at that time. Another NGC MS68 example sold at Heritage on May 4, 2022 for $1,740, demonstrating just how dramatically prices can differ even within the same top numerical grade. PCGS records a $6,463 auction result for an MS68 example in January 2017. These are not ordinary market prices for the date, and they should never be interpreted as a promise that a raw bicentennial quarter is worth thousands. They represent certified, exceptionally preserved coins that attracted serious competition. A collector evaluating a raw 1976 D-quarter might encounter a piece that appears brilliant and uncirculated, but ultimately grades MS64 or MS65, where its market position is entirely different from an MS68. The lesson is that the date and D mint mark identify the coin, but the grade determines how successfully that particular survivor escaped the damage that affected so many others. Heritage's 2022 description noted that more than 860 million Denver bicentennial quarters had been manufactured, yet only 6 examples had qualified for MS68 at NGC, and 10 others were at PCGS at that point, with none finer at either service. Those population figures explain why the market can pay extraordinary premiums for a coin that began life as one of hundreds of millions. There is another path to rarity that does not depend entirely on an almost flawless surface: genuine die varieties. The 1976 D-quarter has recognized double die obverse varieties, including FS101 and FS102, and these are especially important because they demonstrate why collectors must inspect the design rather than simply polish the coin and look for shine. A true double die originates from the preparation of the die itself and produces characteristic separation or doubling in specific design elements. It is fundamentally different from machine doubling, strike damage, or a random scrape that happens to resemble a doubled letter. PCGS catalogs both the 1976 DDO FS101 and FS102 as distinct varieties. The market can respond strongly when a recognized variety is authenticated, especially when it is combined with an impressive grade. The FS101 variety has a documented PCGS auction record of $8,400 for an MS66 example sold by Heritage Auctions on May 7, 2023. That result is especially important because it demonstrates that the greatest value does not necessarily belong to the visually cleanest normal coin. A properly attributed and authenticated variety can create an entirely different collecting category. FS102 has also appeared in the marketplace, but its documented record is far lower, showing why even 2 varieties from the same date and mint can have dramatically different levels of demand. PCGS lists a $450 result for a PCGS genuine FS102 example in 2019. These records reinforce the central principle of responsible coin collecting. An unusual appearance is not enough. The variety must be correctly attributed, and the coin's grade, originality, certification, and market demand all have to be considered before assigning a meaningful value. Authentication becomes especially important once a coin enters the territory where 4-figure valuations are possible. A collector should begin with basic measurements rather than assumptions. A normal clad 1976 D-quarter should be close to 5.67 grams and 24.3 millimeters, with a reeded edge and the expected copper-nickel clad construction. Weight variations can occur from production tolerances and so a scale is a screening tool, not a final verdict. Magnification can help reveal suspicious alterations, but it can also mislead an inexperienced observer. A dramatic-looking line on a letter may be damage rather than a doubled die, while a color difference along the edge may simply reflect the normal clad structure. Counterfeiters and coin doctors may also manipulate genuine low-value coins by adding marks, altering surfaces, applying artificial color, or attempting to create the appearance of a recognized variety. For a potentially valuable piece, professional third-party authentication and grading are the safest route. A certification holder is not merely packaging. It provides an independent assessment of authenticity and condition, although collectors should still verify certification information through the grading service and ensure the coin actually corresponds to the listed description. Storage is equally important. Never clean a potentially valuable bicentennial quarter with household chemicals, metal polish, abrasive materials, or a cloth. Fingerprints can leave oils on the surfaces, so important pieces should be handled by the edge or placed in a suitable inert holder. Avoid PVC-containing flips for long-term storage and keep valuable coins away from excessive humidity, heat, and unstable environments. If the coin has a recognized variety or significant provenance, preserve photographs and documentation alongside it. A valuable coin is not merely a piece of metal. Its chain of evidence can become part of its collectible identity. The 1776 1976D bicentennial quarter ultimately demonstrates one of the most important principles in American numismatics. Enormous mintage does not prevent exceptional rarity at the highest levels. Denver produced 860,118,839 clad bicentennial quarters, and that number makes the ordinary example common by almost any reasonable standard. Yet the finest surviving pieces occupy a completely different category because preservation, strike quality, luster, originality, and certification progressively narrow the field. The auction record proves that distinction. A certified MS-68 has reached $6,462.50 at Heritage, while another MS-68 brought $1,740, and the recognized FS-101 double-die variety reached $8,400 in MS-66. Those results are extraordinary precisely because they are not representative of the typical 1976 D quarter. They belong to authenticated coins whose condition or variety placed them in a highly competitive segment of the market. For someone examining a coin today, the sensible question is therefore not, is this bicentennial quarter worth thousands, but rather, what exactly do I have? Is it a normal circulated coin, an attractive mint state survivor, an unusually high-grade example, or a recognized double-die variety? Is its surface original? Does its strike show the quality expected at the grade being considered? Does the edge and weight support the stated composition? Has a professional service authenticated and graded it? And does its appearance justify the premium the collectors are currently willing to pay? The answers to those questions determine whether the coin is simply a fascinating piece of America's bicentennial celebration or an unusually desirable numismatic survivor. More than half a century after the mint began producing these dual-dated quarters, their historical significance remains secure, but their financial significance depends on something much more demanding: the individual quality and rarity of the exact coin in front of you. Next coin. The 1977 D Washington quarter is the kind of coin that can sit unnoticed in a drawer for decades, its familiar portrait and small d appearing no different from countless other quarters. Yet serious collectors know that the real story begins when you stop looking at the denomination and start examining the individual coin. Why did some survivors remain remarkably sharp, while others were quickly worn down? What does the tiny Denver mint mark actually tell us? Which imperfections are ordinary damage, and which features could have originated at the mint itself? And why can an exceptionally preserved example attract far more attention than its humble face value would suggest? Those questions make the 1977 D an interesting investigation rather than simply another old quarter. Later, we will separate ordinary examples from coins that have genuine collector significance, examine the characteristics professionals use when assigning grades, investigate documented varieties and errors without confusing them with damage, and look at verified market results where exceptional authenticated pieces have commanded serious premiums. The important point from the beginning is that age alone does not make this quarter rare. Its collector potential comes from the exact combination of condition, originality, strike, variety, error status, certification, and demand found on the individual specimen. The first clue appears in the date itself. By 1977, the United States had already moved through the dramatic silver-to-clad transition that had transformed the Washington quarter a decade earlier, and the nation was entering the later years of an economically difficult decade. Inflation remained a major concern, energy prices and shortages had left their mark on American consumers, and the country was adjusting to the political and social changes that followed the bicentennial period. Against that background, the mint continued producing enormous quantities of everyday coinage because quarters were essential to commerce. The 1977 D was struck at the Denver Mint, and the D beneath Washington's portrait identifies that production facility. Approximately 376,607,228 examples were struck there, a number large enough to immediately establish that the date and mint mark alone do not make the coin scarce. That is a crucial distinction for anyone searching through old change. A 1977 D quarter is not a rarity merely because it has survived from the 1970s. In fact, millions of survivors remain available to collectors. The fascinating part comes when we ask how many of those survivors retain truly superior surfaces and strike quality after leaving the mint. A coin can be common in total population while becoming scarce in the finest grades, because every year of storage, handling, transportation, and circulation creates opportunities for marks and wear. That is where the investigation shifts from the history of a production run to the history of one particular coin. PCGS.com, https://www.pcgs.com/coinfacts/coin/1970d25c/5913 Utum source equals chat.com. Before judging condition, an experienced collector establishes exactly what the coin is. The 1977 D Washington quarter is a copper-nickel-clad issue with a weight of approximately 5.67 grams and a diameter of about 24.3 millimeters. Its edge is reeded, and the coin's clad construction consists of copper-nickel outer layers bonded to a copper core. This is important because a silver-colored appearance does not automatically mean silver, and a slightly copper-toned edge does not automatically indicate damage. The metal itself reflects the technological solution adopted for circulating quarters after the government moved away from traditional silver composition. On the obverse is John Flanagan's portrait of George Washington, with Liberty above, In God We Trust, positioned alongside the portrait, the date below, and the small D mint mark identifying Denver. The reverse features the heraldic eagle beneath United States of America, with $quarter below and EPLUIBUS UNUM above. Although the design appears familiar, experienced collectors study it closely because the areas around the lettering, Washington's hair and cheek, the eagle's feathers, and the open fields can reveal whether a coin has experienced friction, contact marks, weak striking, or post-mint damage. The edge deserves attention too. If a supposed valuable 1977 D weighs dramatically outside normal expectations or displays an obviously incorrect edge or composition, that is a reason for further investigation rather than excitement. Basic measurements cannot prove authenticity by themselves, but they establish whether the coin belongs within the expected physical parameters before more sophisticated examination begins. Now look at the coin as if it was still sitting on the Denver Mint's production floor. A blank planchet would first have to be prepared to the proper dimensions and composition before entering the striking process. Under tremendous pressure, dies transferred the Washington portrait and reverse design into the metal, creating the raised details collectors see today. The challenge for modern high-volume coinage was not producing one beautiful quarter, it was producing millions of consistent pieces quickly enough to meet national demand. Freshly struck coins were handled in bulk, and that process could leave contact marks even before a quarter reached a bank. Later, bags, counting equipment, transportation, vending machines, cash registers, and ordinary pocket use added more opportunities for surface damage. This explains why a 1977 D quarter can show strong original luster while simultaneously carrying numerous small marks. When you examine one, do not simply ask whether it looks shiny. Tilt it beneath a single light source and watch how the luster moves across the fields. Original mint state luster should flow naturally rather than appearing like a flat polished surface. A harshly cleaned coin can sometimes look brighter to an inexperienced observer, but actually be less desirable to specialists because its original surface has been disturbed. Strike quality is another separate question. A coin can be virtually free of wear, yet lack sharp definition in certain design elements because of the way metal flowed into the dies during striking. The best specimens combine strong detail, attractive luster, clean surfaces, and natural eye appeal. That combination is much harder to find than simply locating an uncirculated 1977 D. This is where grading turns a visual impression into a professional assessment. A circulated 1977 D quarter generally falls into the lower grades because wear gradually removes the original mint surface from the highest points of the design. Washington's cheek and hair, the eagle's breast and feather details, and exposed portions of the lettering are among the areas collectors examine for evidence of friction. Coin that still retains full mint state characteristics enters the MS scale, but MS does not mean flawless. MS-60 can describe an uncirculated coin with substantial marks, while progressively higher grades demand increasingly superior surfaces and overall quality. By the time a collector is considering MS-65, MS-66, or MS-67, tiny contact marks become increasingly important, especially in prominent fields where they are easy to see. This is why two coins that appear equally uncirculated in a casual glance can have very different professional grades. Surface preservation, strike, luster, and eye appeal all interact. The 1977 D is also not normally assigned the familiar red, red-brown, or brown color designations used for copper cents, because this is a copper-nickel-clad quarter rather than a bronze Lincoln cent. Nevertheless, natural tunning can influence appearance and desirability. Attractive, original tunning may appeal to collectors, while artificial coloration, chemical treatment, polishing, or other surface manipulation can seriously undermine confidence. At the top of the grading scale, rarity is driven not by the huge original mintage, but by the shrinking number of coins that combine exceptional preservation with the precise characteristics collectors seek. That is the paradox of the 1977 D, plentiful at the bottom, increasingly difficult at the summit. Once the coin survives this examination, the market becomes much more selective. Ordinary circulated examples generally trade for little more than face value, and many raw uncirculated 1977 D quarters remain inexpensive because large numbers survived. Even a nice mint state coin should not automatically be assigned a four-figure value. The situation changes only when a specimen possesses an unusually high certified grade, a recognized variety, or a legitimate mint error that collectors specifically pursue. Publicly documented auction records for this date demonstrate the importance of certification and grade. PCGS records a regular 1977 D quarter graded MS-67 that sold for $4,800 in 2021, an extraordinary result compared with the value of an ordinary example. Another PCGS record shows an MS-67 specimen bringing $2,880 in 2022. These results are not representative prices for the entire 1977 D population. They belong to coins certified at an elite level where competition among advanced collectors can become intense. If a raw coin appears exceptionally clean, that does not mean it is automatically worth $3,000 or $4,000. It might ultimately grade several points lower, or it could have a surface problem invisible to someone without professional experience. The market is paying for scarcity within a grade, not simply for an old date. At the highest levels, population reports become increasingly relevant because collectors can see how many coins have been certified at a particular grade and whether any are known to be finer. When the supply of truly exceptional coins becomes very small, a competitive auction can push the price substantially above ordinary market levels. PCGS.com, https://www.pcgs.com/coinfacts/coin/1970c/5913 utum source equals chat.com. But condition is not the only route to importance. The next question is whether the coin contains a genuine variety or mint-made error. This is where disciplined observation matters most because modern coinage produces countless false alarms. Machine doubling can resemble a doubled die, scratches can appear to alter lettering, and post-mint damage can create shapes that look dramatic under magnification. A genuine doubled die is different. The die itself carries a duplicated design impression resulting from the die-making process, producing characteristic separation or spread in specific design elements. Similarly, an off-center strike occurs when the planchet is not properly centered between the dies, while a clipped planchet results from a recognized problem in the blanking process. Other errors can involve wrong planchets, broad strikes, or die-related abnormalities, but each requires authentication. A 1977 D quarter should therefore never be called a rare error simply because something looks unusual. Collectors compare the feature against documented references, and when the stakes are high, submit the coin to a professional grading service. The same caution applies to alleged die varieties. Magnification is useful for locating details, but it cannot replace attribution. If an apparent doubled letter disappears when the lighting angle changes, or if the feature looks like metal pushed aside by impact, suspicion should replace certainty. The strongest candidates are repeatable, diagnostic, and consistent with known mint processes. In a serious collection, a verified error or recognized variety can transform a common date into a much more specialized numismatic object. But the value comes from the authenticated attribution, not from an imaginative description attached to an ordinary damaged quarter. Authentication becomes even more important when a coin appears to enter four-figure territory. Start with the simplest observations. Confirm the date. Confirm the D mint mark. Check the diameter and approximate weight. Examine the edge for the expected reading and clad construction. Inspect the surfaces under magnification, but resist the urge to clean anything. Look for unnatural tool marks, suspicious plating, altered mint marks, added doubling, or surface treatments designed to make an ordinary coin appear rare. A genuine coin can also be damaged, so authenticity and condition are separate questions. A real 1977 D quarter with a scratch is still genuine, but the scratch may dramatically reduce its value. A real quarter with artificial color is still genuine, but the alteration can make it undesirable to collectors. For a potentially important specimen, third-party authentication and grading provide the strongest independent assessment. Collectors should also verify certification information through the grading company's official database rather than relying solely on a photograph or seller's description. Counterfeits of common modern coins may not always be economically attractive to produce individually, but valuable varieties and unusually high-grade examples can create incentives for alteration. This is why provenance, certification, clear photographs, and documented auction history become increasingly useful as the potential value rises. A coin offered online for $2,500 is not automatically a $2,500 coin simply because someone has typed that number into a listing. Market value is established through credible transactions and collector demand. The most convincing evidence is a properly authenticated coin with a grade and attribution that the marketplace recognizes. Preserving a promising 1977 D is surprisingly simple, provided you avoid the mistakes that damage so many collectible coins. Never polish the surfaces to make them shine, and never use household silver cleaners, abrasive cloths, toothpaste, solvents, or other chemicals on a coin you suspect may have collector value. Those treatments can leave microscopic scratches, remove original luster, or create unnatural surfaces that professional graders can identify. Handle the coin by its edges, preferably over a clean, soft surface, in case it is accidentally dropped. For long-term storage, use an inert holder designed for numismatic preservation and avoid PVC-containing plastics that can leave damaging residues over time. Keep the coin in a stable environment away from excessive humidity and rapid temperature fluctuations. If the quarter has an unusual variety, suspected error, or unusually high grade, photograph both sides before submitting it for professional evaluation and retain the certification information once graded. The goal is not to make an ordinary coin look better, it is to preserve whatever original qualities it already possesses. This is particularly important for mint state coins because the market's highest premiums are tied to originality. A perfectly natural surface with honest mint luster can be far more desirable than a bright-looking coin that has been mechanically or chemically altered. Long-term collectability also benefits from documentation. A coin that can be traced through a reputable grading service or auction history has a stronger foundation for future evaluation than an anonymous raw coin accompanied only by a seller's claim. The 1977 D Washington quarter ultimately reveals why experienced collectors rarely judge a coin by its date alone. Denver produced roughly 376.6 million examples, so the ordinary quarter is abundant, and the vast majority were never intended to become high-value rarities. Yet among that enormous population are survivors that escaped circulation, avoided serious contact marks, retained strong luster, and achieved elite certified grades. PCGS auction records show just how far the market can separate those coins from ordinary examples. Documented MS-67 pieces have brought $2,880 and $4,800, with the higher result reflecting an exceptionally competitive market for a top-quality survivor. Those numbers should be viewed as evidence of what authenticated, elite examples have achieved, not as a standard valuation for every 1977 D quarter. The real investigation begins with the individual coin in your hand. Look first at the date and D mint mark, then study the strike. Move to the Fields and Washington's portrait, searching for contact marks and signs of cleaning. Watch the luster under changing light. Inspect the lettering and major design details for genuine doubling or other mint origin abnormalities. Examine the edge, confirm the physical specifications, and consider whether the overall appearance is consistent with an original coin. If something truly unusual survives this process, professional authentication can determine whether the feature is significant or simply damage. That is what gives the 1977 D its lasting place in American numismatics, not a false promise that every old quarter is a treasure, but the genuine possibility that within a massive population of ordinary coins, a remarkably preserved or authentically unusual survivor can become an object of serious collector competition. Its historical importance comes from the era it represents. Its numismatic importance comes from the individual qualities that distinguish one survivor from millions of others. Next coin. The 1978 D Washington quarter is one of those coins that can pass through a person's hands without attracting a second glance, yet under magnification and professional grading, the same date and mint mark can tell a very different story. Millions were made, millions survived, and countless examples have spent decades sitting quietly in collections or circulating through American commerce. But serious collectors do not judge this quarter simply by its age or by the fact that it carries a Denver D. They look for the qualities hidden in the individual specimen: the sharpness of the strike, the preservation of the original surfaces, the movement of mint luster, the absence of distracting contact marks, and any legitimate feature that separates one coin from the enormous population surrounding it. That is where this investigation becomes interesting. The 1978 D is not a classic key date, and its large mintage makes an ordinary example readily available, but the finest survivors can become much harder to locate. Later, we will examine why that happens, what professional graders actually see when they inspect one, how authentic varieties and mint errors should be distinguished from damage, and what documented auction evidence reveals about the upper end of the market. The central question is not whether every 1978 D quarter is valuable. It clearly is not. But why a particular example can become substantially more desirable once rarity, grade, originality, and collector competition converge. To understand the coin, we have to return to 1978, a year when the United States was still adjusting to the economic turbulence of the 1970s. Inflation was a persistent concern, energy costs remained a major issue after the decade's oil shocks, and Americans were dealing with an economy very different from the prosperous environment that had characterized much of the earlier post-war period. Yet the quarter remained indispensable to everyday life. It paid for parking, vending machines, transportation, small purchases, and countless transactions that required dependable circulating coinage. The Denver Mint produced 287,373,152 Washington quarters dated 1978, making the D issue considerably smaller than some neighboring years, but still far too abundant for the date itself to qualify as a major rarity. The coin belongs to the long-running Washington quarter series that had begun in 1932, although by 1978, the original silver composition had long since disappeared from ordinary circulation. The Denver Mint mark is found beneath Washington's portrait on the obverse and identifies the facility responsible for striking the coin. That tiny letter is therefore useful for attribution, but it should not be confused with a scarcity indicator. An experienced collector starts with the date and mint mark precisely because those details establish the coin's identity, then immediately moves beyond them. The real investigation begins when we ask how many of those hundreds of millions of Denver quarters survived with the kind of preservation that advanced collectors actually pursue. PCGS.com, https://www.pcgs.com/coinfacts/coin/1978D25C/5905/66 Atom source equals chat.com. The physical specifications provide the next layer of evidence. The 1978 D quarter weighs approximately 5.67 grams, measures 24.3 millimeters in diameter, and has a reeded edge. It is composed of a copper-nickel outer layer bonded to a pure copper center, with the outer material containing 75% copper and 25% nickel. This clad construction gives the coin its familiar pale metallic appearance, while allowing the warmer copper core to become visible along portions of the edge. That feature can be useful during an initial inspection, but it is not an independent authentication test because wear, environmental exposure, and lighting can change what the eye perceives. The obverse retains John Flanagan's portrait of George Washington, with Liberty above, In God We Trust beside the portrait, the date beneath, and the Denver D immediately below Washington. On the reverse, the heraldic eagle spreads its wings beneath United States of America, while quarter dollar occupies the lower portion and EPLUIBUSUNUM appears above. The design had become so familiar by 1978 that most Americans probably never considered the craftsmanship involved in transferring those intricate elements onto millions of metal blanks. Yet those details are precisely where specialists look for strike quality. They inspect the hair and facial features of Washington, the lettering, the eagle's feathers, the fields surrounding the major devices, and the overall sharpness of the design. If a supposed rare quarter has an unusual weight, incorrect dimensions, suspicious edge, or obvious alteration to the mint mark, those observations should lead to further testing rather than an immediate valuation. The manufacturing process explains why two coins struck in the same year can emerge from the mint with dramatically different appearances. A properly prepared clad planchet entered the striking operation between dies carrying the obverse and reverse designs, and tremendous pressure forced the metal into those recessed details. At industrial scale, however, the goal was not to create museum-quality specimens one at a time. The Denver Mint had to produce enormous quantities efficiently, and newly struck quarters were handled in bulk as they moved through counting, storage, packaging, transportation, and distribution. Contact between coins could create small marks before the pieces even entered circulation. Once a quarter reached the banking system, additional contact with other coins, machines, pockets, cash drawers, and hard surfaces could gradually transform a brilliant new coin into a worn survivor. This is why an experienced collector studies luster rather than simply asking whether a quarter looks shiny. Original mint luster has a distinctive movement when the coin is tilted under light, whereas polishing can produce an unnaturally bright but lifeless appearance. Strike quality must also be separated from preservation. A coin may have no obvious circulation wear and still show weakness in particular design areas because of how the metal flowed during striking or because of die and press conditions. Conversely, a well-struck piece may have excellent detail but suffer from numerous contact marks. The most desirable coins combine strong detail with original luster, clean surfaces, attractive eye appeal, and minimal distractions. Those qualities were never evenly distributed across hundreds of millions of production pieces, and that imbalance is the foundation of high-grade rarity. Now imagine placing a 1978 D quarter beneath the lens of a professional grader. The first question is whether the coin shows actual wear. If the highest points of Washington's portrait and the reverse design have lost their original texture through circulation, the coin belongs below the mint state range. A genuinely uncirculated specimen enters the MS grading scale, but that does not mean it is flawless. At MS60, a coin can retain its original mint state status while displaying substantial marks or other distractions. As the numerical grade rises, the standards become increasingly demanding. At MS64 and MS65, collectors begin expecting stronger surfaces and better overall presentation. At MS66 and MS67, tiny marks in important fields can become decisive. The difference may be difficult for an inexperienced viewer to see, yet it can be significant in the marketplace. The 1978D is particularly interesting at this level because PCGS currently lists MS67 Plus as the top grade for the regular strike issue in its CoinFacts record. The population at the highest grades is therefore far more important than the original mintage. A coin does not become rare merely because 1978 is an older year. It becomes scarce when very few surviving examples meet the strict requirements of an elite grade. Color requires a little clarification as well. Unlike copper Lincoln cents, which can receive red, red-brown, or brown designations, a clad Washington quarter is not normally categorized through those same color labels. Collectors still care deeply about natural tunning and surface originality, however. Attractive, stable tunning can enhance eye appeal, while artificial coloration, dipping, polishing, or chemical treatment can make a technically uncirculated coin much less desirable. Only after those fundamentals are established does the market begin to reveal why the finest 1978D quarters command attention. PCGS records an auction record of $1,527.50 for a 1978D Washington quarter graded MS67 Plus, sold by Heritage Auctions on August 10, 2016. That number is important, but perhaps the more important fact is what it does not mean. It does not mean that an ordinary 1978D quarter is worth anywhere near four figures. It does not mean every uncirculated example deserves a premium. It represents a certified coin at the extreme upper end of the known grading spectrum, where the supply becomes dramatically smaller and competition can intensify. NGC's auction database also records the same $1,527.50 heritage result and reports an all-time average auction price of about $131.01 across the MS examples it tracks, illustrating the enormous difference between typical certified material and an elite top-grade specimen. That contrast is the market lesson collectors should remember. A raw quarter that appears bright and attractive might ultimately grade MS64 or MS65, while a genuinely exceptional coin may climb into a grade where only a small population is known. In practical terms, a collector might see a four-figure market outcome associated with a coin around $1,500, but that result belongs to a very specific certified example rather than the entire Dayton mint population. The market is paying for scarcity within the grade, not for the number 1978 printed beneath Washington. Auction competition can change from year to year, and the same numerical grade does not guarantee identical results because strike, eye appeal, certification population, pedigree, and buyer preferences all influence what happens when the hammer falls. PCGS.com, https://www.pcgs.com/auction-prices/details/1978 DMS/5905 Atom source = chat.com. There is another reason an apparently ordinary 1978D deserves careful examination: the possibility of a genuine mint-made variety or error. This is where the difference between numismatic investigation and internet speculation becomes critical. A coin can acquire doubling, scratches, flattened letters, discoloration, or strange shapes after it leaves the mint, and none of those automatically qualify as valuable errors. Machine doubling, for example, can create a shelf-like appearance around lettering and is frequently mistaken for a doubled die. A genuine doubled die results from a problem in the die-making process and produces characteristic duplication in the design itself. Other legitimate errors can include off-center strikes, clipped planchets, broad strikes, wrong planchet strikes, and dye-related abnormalities, but the precise feature must be documented and authenticated before a collector assigns it a premium. The 1978D should therefore be examined under controlled lighting and magnification, with special attention to the date, mint mark, lettering, and major design elements. A collector who discovers an unusual feature should photograph both sides, record the coin's weight, inspect the edge, and compare the suspected variety with trusted numismatic references. If the feature remains convincing, professional attribution is the next step. This matters because a recognized error or variety can place a common date into a completely different collecting category, but a damaged coin cannot be transformed into a rarity simply by giving the damage an impressive name. Counterfeiters and coin manipulators also make authentication essential when significant money is involved. An altered mint mark, artificially created doubling, polished surface, or chemically changed color can fool photographs, but often becomes apparent during professional examination. The more valuable the claim, the stronger the evidence should be. The same discipline applies when evaluating a supposedly high-grade coin before deciding whether professional certification is justified. Begin with the date and confirm that the mint mark is a genuine D positioned where it belongs. Check the approximate weight and diameter, then study the reeded edge for consistency with a normal clad quarter. Move across the obverse and reverse under magnification, looking for hairlines from cleaning, unnatural abrasions, heavy contact marks, corrosion, or evidence that someone has altered the surface. Pay particular attention to Washington's cheek and the broad fields because marks in open areas are often more noticeable than marks hidden among design details. Then examine the reverse for the quality of the eagle, lettering, and surrounding fields. A high-grade coin should also show coherent original luster rather than a flat, mirror-like shine caused by polishing. For a potentially significant variety or error, independent certification becomes especially valuable because it creates a documented attribution and grade that future buyers can evaluate. Verification of the certification number through the grading company's own records is also wise, particularly when purchasing online. A slab alone should not replace common sense. A seller's asking price is not proof of market value, and a photograph cannot establish whether a coin is genuine, original, or correctly attributed. Preservation begins before certification. Never clean the coin, never rub it with a cloth, and never use household chemicals intended to brighten metal. If the coin is important enough to protect, hold it by the edges and place it in an inert holder designed for long-term numismatic storage. Avoid PVC-containing materials and unstable environments, and keep valuable coins away from excessive moisture and rapid temperature changes. If the coin has unusual tunning, a suspected error, or a notable provenance, photographs and written records can preserve information that may become useful later. The deeper significance of the 1978D becomes clear when its rarity is viewed through collector psychology rather than through mintage alone. A collector assembling a Washington quarter set does not merely need a 1978D. That collector can acquire one relatively easily. The challenge changes when the goal becomes an exceptionally high-grade set, where each coin must compete against every other certified survivor for the same narrow position in the collection. That is why registry set competition and population reports can influence demand. If a collector already owns an MS-66 but discovers that only a handful of MS-67 plus pieces are known, the finest available example may suddenly become far more interesting than hundreds of ordinary uncirculated quarters. This is also why eye appeal matters even among coins sharing the same grade. A technically equivalent coin with cleaner fields, stronger luster, more balanced surfaces, and attractive natural tunning can be preferred over a less appealing example. The long-term historical importance is quieter than that of an early silver Washington quarter, but it is still meaningful. The 1978D represents American coinage during the late 1970s, when the nation's everyday money was fully immersed in the post-silver-clad era and industrial-scale mint production had become normal. It is a physical survivor of a period marked by inflation, changing consumer habits, and a nation moving toward the final decades of the 20th century. And if you want to understand why an ordinary-looking quarter can become a serious numismatic object, the answer is hiding in the details most people never think to examine. The 1978 D Washington quarter therefore rewards a different kind of collector, the person willing to slow down and investigate rather than assume. Its 287,373,152 piece Denver mintage makes the ordinary coin plentiful, while the certified MS-67 plus population demonstrates how dramatically scarcity can change once preservation reaches the highest level. The verified $1,527.50 auction record belongs to that elite category. Not to every quarter carrying a DA circulated example may have little premium. An attractive uncirculated piece may remain relatively affordable, and a certified coin in an intermediate mint state grade may trade far below the top auction result. Only when exceptional preservation, strong strike, original surfaces, certification, and genuine scarcity come together does the market have a reason to compete aggressively. That is why the right way to examine a 1978 D is almost forensic. Start with the date, confirm the mint mark, check the physical specifications, study the edge, follow the luster across the fields, look at Washington's portrait for friction and contact marks. Inspect the reverse for strike strength and surface quality. Examine the lettering for anything that could represent legitimate doubling, but assume nothing until the feature has been compared with authoritative references. If a suspected error or variety survives that scrutiny, authentication can establish whether it is truly mint-made. Preserve the coin without cleaning it. Document what you find and let professional grading determine where it belongs in the larger population. In the end, the most fascinating thing about the 1978 D is not that millions were made. It is that among millions of ordinary survivors, a tiny fraction can become extraordinary because of qualities that were almost invisible when the coins first entered American commerce. The collector's task is to learn how to see those qualities before the market has to tell you what they mean.